No gorilla wanted. This albino baby. So a lioness decided to keep him. I was lying in the pale grass with my cheek against the rifle stock and my eye to the scope when I heard it. Not a bird, not wind moving the dry stalks. Something lower than both of those. A single note from 3 meters directly ahead of me, like a stone dropped into still water and then gone. I held position. I swept the scope left. I had been looking at him for 30 seconds before I saw him. His fur was the color of the grass. Not white the way you picture white. Not clean, not bright. The pale, sun-bleached color of savanna grass at the end of the dry season, after 3 months without rain, have cooked every trace of green out of it and left something the color of old bone. He was sitting with his knees pulled up to his chest and both hands pressed flat to the cracked red soil, completely still, and my scope had moved across him twice before something in his shape. A roundness the wind did not move, a form that held its edges while the grass around it shifted, made my brain stop and come back. I held the scope on him. He was small, maybe 40 centimeters at the shoulder, sitting. His hands were large for his body, the way infant primate hands always are, slightly out of proportion, pressed flat to the earth as if he was feeling for something through it. His eyes were pale gray, and they were looking directly into my scope. Behind me, Lucian's voice came through the earpiece. The leopard was moving south along the tree line. Good light on the eastern edge for the next 40 minutes. Maybe less. This was the window we had been positioning for since before dawn. I did not answer. The light was already brutal. 2 hours in position, and my knees were hot through my pants, and everything smelled of dust and dried grass, and the faint smoke from a controlled burn 30 kilometers to the southwest. To the north, maybe 400 meters, I could hear hyenas. That low, warbling call they make when the distance between them and what they are tracking has gotten small. Something in the grass ahead of me was not going to be alive much longer, and the hyenas were already past deciding about it. I looked back at the baby gorilla. He had not moved. His pale gray eyes were still on my position, steady and unblinking, with the patience of something that had been sitting very still for a very long time, and had learned that stillness was the only tool it had. The dry grass moved around him in the small morning wind. He did not move with it. He was not looking at me. I realized it slowly. He was looking past me, toward something over my left shoulder, and I had been so fixed on finding him in the grass that I had not followed his gaze. When I turned, I saw a shallow depression 40 meters to the east, a low pocket of ground where the morning light had not yet reached, just a shadow in the pale. I got onto my elbows and knees, and I started moving toward it. The terrain was flat, open, no cover in any direction, no elevation, no angle that would hide me from anything watching from the grass or from the tree line to the east. I was crossing exposed ground in full view of the truck behind me, and if anything in that depression decided I was a threat, there was nothing between me and it. Hunters do not move across ground like that. They move along cover, along shadow, along the edges of things where the angles work in your favor. I had no edges. The ground under my palms was hot and cracked. The smell of the grass was the smell of everything that had dried in it, old stalks, old nests, and I moved through it and did not stop. At 30 meters, I raised the scope. The lioness was on her side in the depression. Young, 2 years at most, lean from the dry season, her ribs pressing a visible line under the short, tawny coat. 2 cubs were pressed into her belly, nursing, their eyes shut, their small paws folded. Between them was a third shape, slightly larger than the cubs, slightly the wrong color, a dusty, pale gold-white that did not belong against the tawny on either side. And beneath it, wrapped around the lioness's left foreleg, a small, dark hand, not a cub's paw. 5 fingers, a thumb, a grip. It was not a large hand. It was the hand of something maybe 5 months old, but it was holding on with every gram of strength it had. I took the scope down. I put it back up. I checked 3 times because my brain kept receiving the image and telling me it had made an error. The hand was still there. The jaw of the third animal was still moving in the slow, rhythmic pull of nursing. The lioness had her chin resting on the top of the pale infant's head. Around them, the savannah was flat and silent in the hard white light, and the only sound was the insects and the small jaw still working in its slow rhythm. Then the hyena calls started again. Closer. I started moving. I crawled to 20 meters and stopped. The lion cubs were asleep, folded into the lioness's belly, their breathing visible in the small rise and fall of their sides. The baby gorilla was awake. His pale gray eyes were open and he was still nursing, his hand around the lioness's foreleg with a grip that did not loosen and did not shift. The grip of something that has decided this is the fixed point and has organized everything else around that fact. He was making no sound, not a cry, not a bark, not the low contact call that infant gorillas produce almost continuously when separated. Complete silence. I did not understand until that moment how unusual that was, how much it had taken him to learn it. Then the lioness lifted her head. She turned and looked directly at me. She had already made her decision. What came next was just the answer. My hands were flat in the soil and I kept them there. I stopped every movement, my throat closed. She held the look for 5 full seconds. I counted. Then she lowered her head. She brought her chin back down to the pale infant's neck and began to lick him. Long, slow strokes along the back of his head and his spine, the same rhythm she used on her own cubs, unhurried and complete. The baby gorilla's grip on her foreleg changed. His hand stayed around the leg. He did not let go, but the tension went out of his fingers. The difference between holding on because you are afraid and holding on because you have already found the ground. His eyes closed. I reached up and turned the earpiece all the way off. I put my face in the grass. The soil was hot against my forehead, hard and coarse, smelling of red dust and dried roots and the faint smoke from the southwest. I lay with the side of my face pressed into the cracked earth, and I stayed there. I thought about nothing particular, not the truck, not the permit, not what the night ahead was going to look like. I just lay there in the smell of the earth and let what I had seen keep doing what it was doing. There are things that do not get through you quickly, not like a shock, more like heat through stone, slow at first and then total. What I had just seen was doing that. I could feel it working, and I did not move until it had. The hyenas went quiet. I heard their calls redirect north, away from the depression, and then fade. I lifted my head. The baby gorilla's white chest rose and fell with the lioness's breathing. Even in sleep, his hand was still loosely around her foreleg. He had not let go. He had just stopped being afraid of losing it. I heard Lucian's boots in the dry grass a few seconds before he crouched beside me and put one hand on my shoulder. 3 hours of good light. He kept his voice low. The leopard has not left the southern corridor. I did not look up. Sloan. A pause. Last morning of the permit. I told him I was not finishing the hunt. He was quiet. When he spoke again, his voice had moved into a different register. Not cold, not raised, flat. The voice of a man who has done this long enough to know that certain conversations have one purpose, which is to state what is true and be done. He told me the deposit was $12,000, non-refundable under the contract I had signed. Trip completion required for insurance certification. He said it once, in plain language, and he did not say it again. Then he stood and told me what was not in any contract. He had a second client arriving tomorrow, a full day's drive to prepare, a timeline with no room in it. He picked up a stone, turned it once in his hand, set it back in the grass. If I was still here in 20 minutes, he was driving back to camp without me. 60 kilometers to the nearest road, in a direction I could not locate without equipment I did not have. 38 degrees at midday. He held up his keys, turned toward the truck, and walked. He was not bluffing. 3 days with a person tells you most of what you need to know about them, and Lucian was not a man who said things he did not intend. I kept my eyes on the depression. What happens to albino animals in social groups is not cruelty. There is no decision, no vote, no moment where a group looks at one of their own and chooses against him. It is older than decision. A group that depends on coordinated movement, on reading each other's bodies at distance, on camouflage that only works when every animal matches, cannot carry one that breaks the pattern. The mother stops carrying him. The other females follow her lead. The dominant male stops including him in the group's movements. One day the group moves northeast along the forest edge and does not slow down, and the direction the infant crawls when he goes looking for them takes him into the open grass. In the dark interior of the gallery forest, a white gorilla is visible from 50 meters. Every predator that hunts by sight finds him immediately. In the pale, bleached savanna grass at the end of the dry season, his white fur is not a beacon. It is cover. He had survived 9 days because he sat still the way frightened infant gorillas sit still, and the grass had hidden him in the only way the forest never would have. The baby gorilla's small hand was still loosely around the lioness's foreleg. The thin diagonal scar on his left arm caught the morning light. I stood up. I walked to the truck. I opened the back and pulled out my rifle, my pack, and the spare 2-liter water container. I set them in the grass. I closed the door. I stepped back. I told Lucian he could go. He started the engine. He went. The sound of the engine faded south, and then there was nothing but heat and insects and the breathing sound of the open savanna. I sat down 20 meters from the depression, rifle across my knees, the 2-liter container in the grass beside me. The sun had climbed past vertical, and the shadow I made was almost nothing. The soil under me was hot and cracked, every ridge of it pressing through my pants into my legs. I had spent my whole adult life learning how to be still in open ground, how to make yourself smaller than you are, how to disappear into a landscape that was not designed for you. I had learned it first in the pine woods of northern Mississippi when I was 9 years old. The first year, I fully understood that the way I looked was not going to change, and the way certain people responded to it was not going to change either, and the only thing in my control was how little of myself I showed. I had always understood it as a hunting skill. I thought about the night ahead. 60 kilometers of open ground, 38 degrees at midday, and no shade between here and the nearest road. Not fear, just the facts laid out flat. I had always known what decisions like this cost. I was sitting in the grass with a rifle and 2 liters of water, and I knew exactly what this one was going to cost, and I was still sitting there. The heat on open ground at midday comes from both directions, down from above, back up from the soil. You sit between the two and breathe it. My lips dried and I did not notice until I tasted blood. I drank 2 sips from the canteen and watched the lioness's chest rise and fall. The baby gorilla slept pressed into her side, his small chest moving with hers. The 2 tawny cubs dozed. One woke, nursed briefly, slept again. I watched all of it. I had nowhere else to be, and for the first time in a long time, that was not a problem. Then the baby gorilla lifted his head. He blinked in the white overhead light. He looked at the 2 tawny cubs. He looked at the lioness. Then he looked toward me. He detached from her quietly. No urgency, no alarm. He simply unlatched and sat up and looked in my direction with those pale gray eyes. And then he began to move. The crawl of an infant gorilla is deliberate and low to the ground. Each limb placed before the weight shifts onto it. The movement of something that has learned that the surface is not always what it appears, that care is the price of getting anywhere. He stopped 4 meters out and looked back at the lioness. She had lifted her head. She was watching him with her chin level, her ears forward, the patient attention of a mother who already knows where he is going and has decided he is allowed. He stopped once more, midway. He looked back. She had not moved. He reached my boots and stopped. He sat back on his haunches and looked up at my face. I have white hair, pale skin that burns in 20 minutes without cover, light eyes that people spent my entire childhood telling me were wrong, too pale, too strange, the features of something that should not have been made the way it was made. I spent 13 years being told, in every way a group of people can tell you something, that I did not belong where I was. I finished high school at a kitchen table with no ceremony and no one to tell. I became a hunter because in the woods the only thing that mattered was the shot, and I was very good at the shot, and nothing else about me was relevant. The baby gorilla looked up at my face. He was 5 months old. He had no categories for what he was seeing. He had not yet learned the mistake of deciding that different means wrong. He looked at what was in front of him. He saw it. He made a decision. He put both hands flat on the top of my boots and held on. I looked at the small white hands on my feet. I looked at the thin scar on his left arm, the pale line of it on pale fur. My throat closed. I had not cried in a very long time, and I did not cry now. I was somewhere past crying, somewhere I do not have a name for. I put 2 fingers, very gently, on the top of his head. The lioness watched. She lowered her chin. She went back to her cubs. The light went long and orange in the late afternoon. The baby gorilla fell asleep against my leg, his small weight warm through my pants. The lioness moved her cubs deeper into the depression as the air began to cool. She looked at me once across the 20 meters between us. Then she settled her chin on her forepaws and closed her eyes. I used the emergency locator in my pack just before dark. The rescue team reached us the following morning. That night was not easy, and I will not say it was. But the baby slept against my side until the sky started to lighten, and I kept my hand on his back, and nothing came out of the dark. The world that expelled him did not change. There is no system built for what he is. Getting him somewhere safe took months and arguments I had to learn to win, and money I did not always have. 14 months after that morning, a conservation organization in the eastern part of the country received an application for a junior field monitor position. The applicant had no biology credentials. Her letter of motivation was 3 sentences long. The last sentence read, "I know how to be still, I know how to be invisible, and I know what it costs an animal to be left behind." In the margin of the application, the director had written one word in pencil: hire.